At some time back, Radio Relay International did kind of a holistic reassessment of the national traffic system, the traffic system in general, that is traffic nets in their entirety. Identified a variety of systemic issues and problems that had affected the traffic system. And just to kind of review some of that, I don't think it's any secret to anybody here that the old NTS system, as it had evolved or de-evolved over time, or as it was abrogated, was plagued by a variety of problems. It's no secret, as a matter of fact, not that long ago, a year or two ago, the ARRL, I don't know if it was the EC&FS committee or the board or others had run some studies and found that there was always a problem of disappearing traffic, right? One would originate radiograms, and they would propagate through the system just fine, and at some point, they would vanish and not reach their destination. So this became kind of a systematic problem. It's always been a bit of a problem, as a matter of fact. If you go back and you read QST magazines from the 1920s, you'll occasionally hear, complaints of this issue, although not to the extent that it began to accelerate, not to the extent to which it accelerated, say in the late 90s, early 2000s, and the like. So there was this problem of really a system breakdown in terms of throughput of traffic. And of course that not only degrades confidence in the system, but it kind of drives away participation and at least it at least gives an indication that maybe the system can't be relied upon for emergency communications purposes, right? I mean, especially in the era of WinLink and other technologies or systems, let's say. There's also a messaging problem, right? I think some tend to equate the importance of the routine day-to-day traffic, or the minimal importance of the traffic handled on a day-to-day basis. The renew your license, thanks for the QSO, whatever, as being essentially unimportant. Therefore, the system is unimportant. And as a result, I think many failed to see the value proposition in the national traffic system in the form of, the training that it provides, the practice in conveying, unfamiliar message content, transcribing messages accurately, understanding the value of the network management data that existed within the radiogram format. The benefit of just building infrastructure, right? That can be pressed into service or leveraged in different ways, either locally at the state/section level or nationally. And then, of course, there was the MCOM disconnect, and this was kind of an emerging dichotomy that began, I think, probably in the late 70s, early 80s, in which the traffic community, the old ARPSC model had kind of disappeared, and you have this divergence that began to occur and increase between local MCOM and say the infrastructure type activities like NTS and wide coverage nets and the like, and you begin to see this process in which local MCOM groups began to build their own net infrastructure, either because they feel that the existing systems didn't support them in a way that they felt was responsive, or because they simply didn't know or consider the existence of pre-existing infrastructure and encourage or force its evolution. But you do begin to see a disconnect emerge between local MCOM and the traffic system and similar type of net resources. And this, of course, obviously pushed to a large extent traffic handling and things of this nature to the background, sometimes the deep margins of the amateur radio service. An added overlay to this was the particularly as public safety and commercial telecommunications common carrier resources improved in terms of diversity and reliability, and as they became ubiquitous, many local MCOM activities were built around providing what you might call value-added services. That is, the ARES and RACES type groups became essentially emergency management volunteers or relief agency volunteers that happened to bring along with them their own radios, but they weren't necessarily filling in a major communications failure or gap, say in the telecommunications environment. Essentially the evolution toward maybe, let's call it purely tactical operations. And then we had, of course, the 500-pound gorilla in the room, which was, the poorly managed, or let's say non-managed bulk traffic origination problem that degraded the traffic nets. The many renew your ham license radiograms and spam type messages, as some call them pejoratively. And not that these didn't have some value actually in promoting ham radio and building local connections and so forth, but far too many of them, probably the majority, had obsolete phone numbers. In many cases, the license wasn't renewed because the individual to whom it was addressed was deceased. And this served as kind of a corrosive element in the traffic community. So there were these long-standing problems, where essentially, the system was built around having a diversity of local outlets, that is probably traffic handlers in most larger communities. And of course, as participation degraded, as these problems kind of festered and they were unaddressed by the legacy organization, the problems kind of accelerated. And, along with this, of course, and it's as H.L. Mencken once said of social problems, for every complex social problem, there's a simple and appealing solution that's wrong. Well, the problems with the traffic system were rather diverse and interlocked. I guess, to use the modern term of the social engineer, there's a lot of intersectionality going along. Not that I'm a fan of that kind of theory, but it does somewhat apply here. And so what we found really was that in order to actually provide a viable MCOM commitment, that there's a variety of problems, obviously, that had to be addressed. And in the broad sense, this is why we created RRI back in 2016, was because we had proven that the traffic system can be a very viable MCOM resource during Cascadia Rising, but only based on the premise that, number one, there's a national response plan, number two, that the operators are properly trained and practiced, and that there's a very strong value proposition in people understanding how to efficiently communicate on behalf of third parties, right? How to properly format messages, how to incorporate the necessary network management data to facilitate servicing, message routing, automation, for example, in the digital traffic network. And so, we basically decided that, traffic handling had to, number one, have a methodology to ensure a high level of both routine service as well as the capacity to provide an MCOM infrastructure called upon to do so, or if necessary, simply to create an asset that local areas didn't necessarily have to reinvent in the form of a parallel network in their region or their state or the like. And so the result of this is, we asked this question, how should RRI evolve? And so we looked at a variety of methods to do this. And we came up essentially with a structural method, and we began implementing what we called a certified radio operator program. So we wanted a program in which we could implement change, we could solve these last mile reliability problems. We could fulfill our duty to MCOM customers, and we could truly, not in word, but in deed, prioritize message traffic by having structures in place that could be activated in time of emergency so that higher priority message traffic could be conveyed rapidly and accurately to any location, within the system. And if you look at the old NTS model, for those that, and probably most people here are familiar with it, it's really structured on a time domain principle, right? So, for example, state nets meet at a scheduled time, say, for example, look at cycle 4 in the older NTS model. Section nets meet at 7 p.m., region nets meet at 7:45, area nets meet at 8. The region nets again meet at 9:30. You have this time domain layering of nets, as well as the geographical layering, the inverted pyramid. It's great for routine traffic, but really in time of emergency, it's obviously not going to work. Number one, there's the issue of large quantities of traffic and the capacity of the system to convey it. But there's also the issue of the delays associated with the various liaison functions and so forth. But in our modern age, right, we have alternatives. We have a national response plan now where we can establish priority entry points, specialized point-to-point circuits. The digital traffic network is fully automated. As soon as you upload a message, it begins forwarding it. We work with the WinLink development team to develop the WinLink to RRI gateway process, and so forth, right? The tools are all there now, and so we had to look at a way in which we could leverage these tools, these technological tools and these structural tools, to ensure that we could handle higher priority messages in an efficient manner. And so the first thing that we looked at was, well, where's the easiest place to start this process? And we realized that that being let's call it a two-phase solution, i.e. structure/technology in one phase, and 2 is operator training, we had to address both issues. And so we started with the structural concept, and we figured the easiest way to implement structural concepts, or the structural solution, is to utilize the infrastructure provided by this modified hybrid mesh network we call digital traffic network. And within that network, to create what you might call a VPN, although more technically it's a virtual pipeline or a parallel network operating on the same backbone, through which higher priority message traffic would be originated. So the idea here is that you have specific target stations in each region and section, and those target stations are responsible for higher priority messages. These are the things like emergency priority, welfare, precedence messages, and the like. And the idea here being is you don't burn them out with bulk traffic, you don't burn them out necessarily with the routine traffic, but you do have a method through which these operators are targeted, if you will, for the higher priority messages, and then it becomes their duty as the target station to ensure timely and rapid routing and delivery by the most expedient means possible to the destination addressee, and that may be as simple as locating the correct Aries net, or the appropriate state net, or delivering it directly if telecommunications resources are in place for example, incoming messages from a disaster area, etc. So we created this what you might call a VPN, or this pipeline within the digital traffic network. The target stations have essentially tactical call signs, so you can have multiple target stations performing the same function, either on a rotating basis or sharing the duties, and that way you don't have the problem of somebody not being home, or something of that nature. So you actually have a methodology through which you have a staffed, let's call it a staffed, let's call it virtual target station, right? Where multiple radio operators can perform that function, either in rotation or dynamically, in response to an emergency. And so we created the VPN. We tested it in several sections. It works, and we have implemented it somewhat. We haven't put it into full operation, and I'll explain why here soon. But it mainly comes down to time and personal energy and things of that nature. But it does work. It's tested, and it's a useful function. The other thing we did, and I think you guys all know this already, maybe not, is that we created a new classification of message called the certified message. Think of it as a certified letter. So essentially, it's a precedence that falls between routine and welfare. And there's some very strict definitions as to what a certified message, or what in the commercial telegraph industry they call the fast telegram is. But essentially, certified messages are handled on the pipeline on the day-to-day basis to keep that process in check. But certain types of messages aren't classified as certified. And these would be things such as bulk originations, for example. So it removes that kind of corrosive, uncoordinated aspect to some extent, so as not to burden the target stations in the various states and regions with that traffic, right? These will be, I guess, what you might call the routine radiograms that are unique. In which there's a pre-existing relationship between the addressee and the originator, and in which the contact data, address information, email, the other information is known to be correct and timely. And obviously, they're not what you might call rubber stamp messages or spam messages. And so we ended up with essentially, in order of importance, the emergency message, priority, welfare, certified / fast telegram, and the routine message traffic. And so that was the plan. However, and I won't go into all these definitions, and you can, I've covered this in a prior RATPAC presentation, but we have a very careful definition of what a certified message is. So essentially, there's now two classes of maybe what you might call routine traffic. There's the day-to-day routine message. This would be the NXK, renew your ham license. Welcome to, amateur radio, join Aries. That's the routine stuff. Or, it can be personal radiograms as well. But a certified message has a somewhat higher bar. It's important to remember, this is amateur radio is a volunteer type activity. So in order to keep nets operating, people have to have a purpose. They need something to do. If you just have people check into a net every week, or you have them check into a net every day, and there's nothing to do, they will drift away because they'll see no sense of purpose in it. They're the radio amateurs, at least those that are attracted to public service communications. They want a, let's call it, they want a reason, or they want to find a purposeful use of two-way radio technology. So you need to give them something to do. You also don't want to abuse them. So the idea here is that on a day-to-day basis, the virtual pipeline, you might call it, the VPN, and the target station process will handle certified messages. And then obviously in time of emergency, this is retooled seamlessly into, say, for example, priority messages or welfare messages. And that's the concept there. The pipeline concept's tested, it's in place. But the other half of it is the human resources problem. And so this addresses the bulk traffic problem. It addresses the routine traffic problem. It assigns direct responsibility to the target station operators to ensure final routing and delivery. It must be delivered type function, and it also ensures that the messages that they do receive for delivery must have accurate point of contact information for the addressee, so that their time isn't wasted trying to deliver essentially, undeliverable messages, let's put it that way, right? And that solves some of the bulk traffic problem. Again, if you're going to create a system, you have to manage your human resources, and you do that by providing them with the tools, the standards, and so forth that are required. So essentially the pipeline, you might call it, this virtual traffic infrastructure, is for these messages here: emergency, priority, welfare, and certified. And then any of the traffic nets can either originate or deliver routine messages. I want to stress, and that this is important, that this is not an exclusionary program. When messages pass through this virtual pipeline, they can be routed to any traffic handler, but the gateway station operator, which as we'll explain in a moment, is called the certified radio operator. The certified radio operator has a defined duty to only route it to operators that are known to be competent and responsible and have the operating skills to accurately deliver the message using the correct forms, the correct policies and procedures. So, for example, we wouldn't want to take a priority message on behalf of a served agency and give it to just any guy that's checked into the net, unless that's maybe our last resort. We want to be able to give it to an operator, be it an ARRL guy, an Aries guy, or an Oxcom guy. It doesn't matter, but he should be a known entity that has the skills and the capacity and the knowledge and experience to ensure that that message is delivered intact in the correct format. For example, on a radiogram ICS 213 form maybe versus a radiogram form, and in a timely and expedient manner, right? So it's not exclusionary, but what it is, it's essentially a quality control problem, okay? So, again, we've talked about this before, but I think it's important to provide the background. Essentially, what we're doing is we're not necessarily, we're adding a layer, if you will, of a quality control layer to the traffic infrastructure. And so this is the benefits, right? Volunteers can handle both say NTS and all the bulk traffic, all the routine radiograms they like, but the radio operators who staff this unique process won't be burned out by bulk originations, and they will have the skills and the accountability and so forth to properly handle important messages. And this brings us to the public service element, and that is essentially, this is not just about providing a better quality of routine radiogram service that can be used to build community and link radio amateurs together and do those important things, but it also can obviously be applied to the MCOM environment. And the MCOM environment brings me to the other half of this, which is the really important point. You guys have all probably heard me say this at one point in the past, or I've written about it in my column in World Radio years ago or whatever. But if I pick up the phone and I dial 911 and I request the local fire company, I have a reasonable expectation that said fire company and its volunteers show up trained, and they know how to use the apparatus, they know how to ventilate the structure, they know how to extricate victims, they have the correct turnout gear, they know how to use it, they know how to attack the fire, etc., right? That's a reasonable expectation. When we're called upon by our community, be it either our neighbors or a served agency or a government agency such as emergency management, to provide either supplemental communication services or critical communication services by filling in a gap caused by a telecommunications outage, they have a reasonable expectation that we show up with working equipment, we know how to operate that equipment, but more importantly, we know how to communicate. We know how to administer message traffic. If I take an ARES or MCOM volunteer and I drop him into an EOC message center, he knows to, for example, keep a file of messages originated. He knows to assign message serial numbers and date time groups so that when inquiries or responses come back, they can be referenced against the original message. He knows how to keep a proper radio log so that if a served agency official asks him a question such as, at what time were those medications delivered to Herman Kiefer Hospital, he can say, well, let me check my radio log. Well, they were delivered at 13:15 local time. These are the skills you learn in traffic handling that you can't learn in time of emergency, right? How to utilize the network management data contained in the preamble of the radiogram or radiogram ICS 213. The kind of fundamental skills that go with functioning in a message center environment. This brings us to the certified radio operator. So we spoke with a variety of organizations and entities, amateur, professional, military, etc. And we really began to look at, okay, what kind of skills and knowledge does a radio operator need, and how do you recognize that? So I want to take a step back and let's talk a little bit about how many ARES groups operate. Okay, so we, or government, let's say, many local emergency management programs, they require an ARES volunteer or an OXCOM volunteer. OXCOM's a little bit better because they actually deal with the communications topics, but ARES, for example, okay, so you would take IS 100, 200, 700, and 800. That's all good stuff. I mean, it explains how at the local level, local governmental level, within the emergency management and NIMS process, how you interact and how the emergency response is structured and who does what, and how. This is all good, but it does nothing to train you on how to communicate. It does nothing to train you on how to manage the administrative process of retaining message traffic files and how to keep a radio log and how to properly utilize phonetic alphabets and pro words. And if some guy comes in and to you and he says I need phenylbutazone. You write that out. He writes that out on a message, form, and you send a message, where you have to spell phenylbutazone, right? You have to have the skills, to do these things, and I think where we've drifted in the MCOM environment is that we provide all kinds of training to people on like hazmat awareness and the NIMS process and all this kind of thing, but Not always. I'm making a broad statement here. Okay, so understand that. But in many cases, no, little or no real hands-on communications training. So an analogy, okay, another favorite analogy of mine, you know, you don't hand a soldier a rifle in battle and say, hey, use this, right? This is your time to learn. You make sure he's trained and fully understands how to maintain that weapon, how to utilize it, how to apply it, right? There's methods of how a unit utilizes their rifle, interlacing fields of fire, things of this nature. There's tactics, let's say, I guess is the term I'm looking for. The same is true for us. You can't just go, I hear Ham say this, and we all have, we've heard this over the years. Well, I don't have time to go to the Aries meeting. I don't have time to participate in nets, but if I'm needed, feel free to give me a call. Well, my granddaughter has a cell phone, and she can communicate very effectively with anybody in the world. I would not trust her to send a request for medications to a hospital because she's not a skilled communicator, right? She's not an emergency communicator. She has the technological tool, assuming that the cell network's up, but she doesn't have the administrative and operational skills, to use the tool. Okay, so when looking at how to implement this program, it's nice if you can build a structure and say, hey, we can solve this problem of traffic delays. We can assign quality control responsibilities within that process. I can originate a WinLink email, right? WinLink's a great resource, but if I don't spell, say, for example, a chemical name correctly, or I make assumptions about what I'm putting in that message that's going to be ultimately delivered by email, that's a problem as well, right? So it doesn't matter what the medium is. It matters what the operator's skills and are, and how he can adapt to problems and improvise and manage the field expedience. Okay, I suddenly don't have access to WinLink. What network am I going to use? What's my alternative? Things of this nature. Okay, so what we did is we created the Certified Radio Operator Program. And the Certified Radio Operator Program is essentially training for RRI volunteers. And its purpose is to ensure that people have the knowledge and the skills to properly support their community in time of emergency, with the emphasis being on infrastructure functions, right? Operating a radio network. There is a difference between operating an infrastructure network and local areas, right? They're two, not necessarily different animals, but they're two phases of a project. Just like there's a difference between maybe the AT&T long lines and the local Bell operating companies years ago. But anyway, the Certified Radio Operator Program is a group of RRI online training classes in which on subjects such as designing an emergency communications exercise, disaster telecommunications theory and practice, basic radio telephone net procedures. I mean, let's face it, most voice nets, or at least in the Aries world, are very poorly conducted because people don't have the requisite skills to ensure net efficiency and brevity of communications and the accurate transmission and relay of information, be it tactical or written. Basically, the structure of the traffic system, how it operates, and as well as a variety of other allied subjects. So we actually developed a set of classes that were required to be certified as a radio operator. So the idea is here that the CRO will be, okay, he's been trained, he's been vetted, And we know he has the knowledge and the background to provide a reliable, customer service, let's say. And so that's the idea here. So, he attends these classes, or she attends these classes. There's some practicum process that's going to go with this. He agrees to abide by the methods and practices guidelines of RRI. He understands the importance of, say, for example, welfare versus, routine traffic and the like. And so ideally, these virtual pipeline operators, eventually, regardless of the mode used, will be certified radio operators. And so it's not designed to be restrictive, but it's designed to ensure that important message traffic is handled accurately and in a timely manner. So again, the idea here is that we start with digital traffic network. That's the initial backbone for this new thing. We, over time, are going to expand it, particularly at the region, state, local level to all traffic nets. And the certified radio operators will staff the higher priority message handling process. And they will be kind of the gateway that will ensure that traffic is routed to competent operators that needn't be CROs, but they need to be determined to be competent. And obviously, we want to build this program so we have multiple target stations in each state that are certified. And that way we know that if we have MCOM traffic going into or out of that state, there's somebody we can point to and say, here's your list of guys. These guys know what they're doing, okay? And of course, this involves things, again, operationally, like tactical, you need tactical addresses versus, say, addressing to call signs, things of this nature. As well as some technical things. But again, we're here really to talk about the certified radio operator process. So CROs will staff the digital traffic net, gateways for the higher classifications of message traffic, certified welfare, priority emergency, and then of course also the WinLink to RRI gateways, which are very commonly used by MCOM organizations. And this ensures that those processes are properly managed. So again, if you look over here on this thing as an example of messages moving through these two pipelines, we have the common pipeline, which is pretty much all the routine day-to-day traffic. And then we have the VPN pipeline, which is staffed by certified radio operators. It's just that simple. And then, of course, ideally, they'll embed themselves or make sure they communicate with their section emergency coordinator and his staff and section traffic manager and the like. And there are some things going on in the background right now that are very hopeful in terms of some things we're talking with the ARRL about. The departure of Fred Kemmerer has opened the door to something RRI has been seeking for a long time, which is a cohesive approach with the league. And recently the league reached out to us, so there's some things going on. They're in the early stages, but I think that there's also going to be some really potentially good cooperation in the forthcoming months that will also help transform these processes. So I'm not going to dig too much into the infrastructure again. There's some older RATPAC forms you can look at where I discuss this in greater detail. But again, our responsibility to MCOM organizations in particular is, obviously we have a national response plan, which has very specific guidelines to govern how we respond to, say, regional or national level emergencies. We have specialized message forms for certain things like situational awareness reports, sit reps, weather observations, operational readiness reports, things of this nature. We want to have the capacity to support MCOM as an additional resource in which people have confidence. And we want to have the ability to dynamically respond to any type of disaster or emergency situation. And that means, for example, the ability to handle traffic in different languages, the ability to use different modes depending on the circumstances, and so on. That's kind of the plan. So I'm going to I'll kind of breeze by some of these over here, and then this is an outline of the CRO training requirements that we established May of last year. And we've had ongoing training now throughout the fourth quarter of 2024 and the first quarter of 2025, at which point we've taken a break basically as we move into the summer months. And so we talked a little bit about what's expected, so, of the CRO here, so that we kind of covered this. Obviously, agree to participate in RI networks in the traffic system, agree to follow our operating directives and procedures, agree to meet the minimum training requirements and complete them, and then, of course, pass any required practicums to demonstrate, competency. So, this is the practicum is one of the requirements. Okay, I want to hear you transmit a radiogram. I want to hear you, utilize the phonetic alphabet correctly, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea here again is that it's a quality control type function to help restore the relevancy and usefulness of the traffic system. It has great, in my opinion anyway, it has great training value. It has great value for building community and infrastructure. So these are the basic requirements. Obviously, you have to take the IS 100, 200, 700, 800 because, well, you need to know how amateur radio plays at the local level, how the NIMS process works, etc. At the request of other agencies with whom we interact, we added 2 cybersecurity courses, one of which, both of which really, one's from the federal government, the other one's from the Department of Defense. And so that's part of the requirement. And the idea here is, again, they need an understanding of the NIMS process. They need to kind of know how radio amateurs fit into the emergency management process. It better facilitates their integration into ARES and OXCOM and the like, where many of, at least the basic IS courses are required. That way they can kind of enlist in that process and become a resource for the local MCOM. And obviously be of value in terms of their skill set and their access to infrastructure. The courses required are as follows: an introduction to the traffic system. Obviously, how does the traffic system operate? And you can find this outline, by the way, on our webpage, so I won't dig too deeply into it, but it kind of gives an outline for each of these courses. We introduced them to some of the RRI affiliated programs, Neighborhood Ham Watch, National SOS Radio Network. So there's a course on that. We have a fairly extensive course. You can see the latest iteration on YouTube, a course entitled Emergency Communications Planning. So this covers things like disaster telecommunications theory, how you plan for disasters, how you layer nets, resource management decisions, some of the considerations that go into planning for disaster communications response. So it's a fairly extensive course. It's actually based on a course I designed for the Michigan State Police some years ago, but obviously retooled for the ham community. But it has a fair number of professional level concepts in it that are useful to hams. Then, of course, we have the course on basic voice communications procedures, because every ham has a microphone. Every ARES group has a voice net of some kind, and always will probably. Voice is a very convenient common denominator, but also in the hands of, it only takes a few inexperienced or incompetent voice operators to mess up say, for example, a 2-meter net or the like. So basic radio telephone net procedures. Then, of course, we have some optional ones. basically a specialized course on CW traffic nets, course on digital traffic nets, or our digital traffic network and the like. And then, of course, practicums. Now, recently, in terms of practicums, RRI has established a Zello channel. Now, you may ask, well, what are you going to do with the Zello channel? It relies on the cellular network. Well, the Zello channel will be utilized this summer, later this spring, actually. We're going to establish a weekly training net on Zello for certified radio operator, or actually anybody that wants to learn how to handle traffic, say in a two-way radio style environment. All you need to do is download the app on your phone and you can participate in a net. You don't need to even have a 2-meter radio, but the idea being that it'll be a tool that simulates two-way radio that can be utilized for training. You're learning how to use that ITU phonetic alphabet, learning how to properly check in and out of nets, learning how to send and receive a radiogram ICS 213 message, etc. And it'll also be a place for demonstrating some of these practicums, right? The ability to transmit a simulated disaster message, how to receive and properly transcribe a simulated disaster message, and so forth. So it solves some of that problem. And also can be used for discussion and coaching. And, say, for example, if operators trying to utilize DTN after setting it up for the first time, somebody can be available on Zello. And again, it's an opportunity to deal with kind of that whole tactical process. So we're going to do that as well. And and then we did define some minimum participation requirements. So we have quite a few people that have completed these requirements to our satisfaction. We're going to be issuing certificates here in the next month or two. And then we will have a cadre of certified radio operators upon which we can build. Now, I will say that it has taken a little bit longer than I had hoped. Mainly, again, it's a classic problem with the amount of time available for leadership. And we've been working on some high priority projects in the background. So, for example, I've been to Puerto Rico. We've been working with the ARL section staff, as well as our own RRI communications manager on Puerto Rico. We've established some redundant digital capabilities. So we've been adding redundancy for disaster telecommunications purposes. My company has built 2 hardened digital nodes that will provide coverage of not just Puerto Rico, but into, for example, St. Kitts and those, Virgin Islands area and the nearby Dominican Republic. And that's we're working on getting donations of some large battery banks and other things for that still. So we're working on let's call it an infrastructure hardening program. So we've been working on that. As you guys know, we've had the I Am Safe program that we've been working on. And then, of course, so we've been engaging in some conversations with the League's NTS 2.0 committee. There's some really good stuff going on in the background that, I haven't really, maybe Dan at some point when we're done with our modernization process there and in some of these areas, as we kind of move into those areas, I can do a presentation on it. There's a lot of good stuff going on in the background, but of course there's a flip side to that. And that is we're all volunteers and only so many hours out of the day. So you end up prioritizing things sometimes in ways that don't make sense to people who, aren't privy to all the information. So there's a lot going on here, in this process. But that's kind of an outline of the background, the reasons, and the requirements to become a certified radio operator. For the general rank and file volunteer that wants to become a CRO, I think they're good classes. I think they cover a lot of very useful information. And the emphasis, again, is not turning you into an emergency management volunteer, or a police reserve, member, or, sheriff's posse. It's to turn you into a qualified communicator. What you do above and beyond that at the local level, if you want to be the grand poobah of the emergency management, well, you can do that too. Or what is it, the grand potentate, ancient Arabic order nobles of the mystic handheld. You can do that too. But anyway, you can. The idea here is we want to create communicators, just as the Marine is a rifleman first, and he's combat ready first. Radio amateurs should be communicators and technologists first. And then if you want to help out at the parade or pass out donuts, all of which is honorable, brew coffee at the Red Cross canteen, go for it, man. It's honorable. As Elizabeth Barrett Browning said, the sweetest lives are those to duty wed, whose deeds both great and small are close-knit strands of an unbroken thread where love ennobles all. So go do those things. They're perfectly honorable and beautiful things to volunteer in your community in any capacity. But but ultimately, your primary role is that of emergency communicator. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop screen share, and you can look at my ugly mug here. And I'll take comments, questions, Rotten Tomatoes. I've got a thick skin. You can, you can ask me questions. So I see Tom's got his hand raised. Tom, go ahead.
Just did. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. One of the requirements, priority to messages originated via the RRI VPN. I assume that means if the messages are the same precedent.
I'm sorry, ask that again. I'm not sure.
I assume that would apply only to messages of the same precedence.
Well, yes.
If I had received a priority message from NTS, and I had a safe and well or welfare message I received from RII, I would presume that the priority message from NTS would come first.
Yes.
Rather,
that's immutable.
I just wanted to be sure about that.
Yeah, that's immutable. Yeah.
And then the other thing I've always had problems with is routed to any particular person. One of the beauties of WinLink is that all I have to do is get out of the stricken area. And
Right.
after that, instead of trying to find a North Dakota target station that happens to be accessible and on the air, it's okay. North Dakota's not net dead right now. It's going to reach that North Dakota target through the email system. There's no reason on earth, to my way of thinking, to try and keep it by radio and have a person in North Dakota deliver it. That doesn't make sense to me. You can speak to that if you'd like. And the last thing is, you're certifying who and as what. I went to 4 senior officials in disaster involved, non-governmental disaster organizations. The Red Cross, the Salvation Army, the Southern Baptist Relief, and I forget who the 4th one was right now. It was more than a year ago. And I said, what would you expect a certified emergency communicator to do for you? Nobody once mentioned radio. I got pretty diverse answers. Like one guy thought, well, if the exchange had been flooded in the basement, we'd provide them with some substitute for that. It's way out of the skill set of the area's operators. At the time, I was the local emergency coordinator for areas. The expectations were not helped by the title the league was using for the position. And I would hope that you could find a way to call these people disaster radio operators. Emergency radio operators are the people who do it all the time at the other end of the 911 loop, as far as I'm concerned. So if you want to make it real to people, call them disaster radio operators. It implies that they come in real handy when the system's overwhelmed. because now you've got a disaster. The definition is an event beyond the resources of the local community to deal with. And you don't string people along. You don't solicit expectations from served agencies that you damn well know you can't meet. A radical example of that is Texas. I don't know if they've given up yet, but I have no word that they have. They promised the Texas emergency management community they could deliver all of their messages complete with an original signature as a image file. And at the exercises, it looks great because it has and they said for a long while, this is a FEMA requirement. They must have the original signature. Okay, it's like most lies, it's partly true. FEMA does have a requirement to receive the original signature. And that happens at the origin point, but a radio operator going at the end of the deployment or end of the shift over to finance and dropping all their second copies in the appropriate file, because the primary copy is the stations. The clearest copy, the actual original, belongs to finance, because that's the one the person's pen touched. All right. And that satisfies FEMA front, back, and sideways. To quote Fred Fugate, sounds to me like somebody's got a real overstock of imaging devices that they're trying to sell radio operators in Texas.
Yeah, let me stop you there, because you gave me a lot to respond to. Okay, so first, yes, okay, you brought up WinLink. Okay, so let's talk about WinLink. What happens if I don't have access to WinLink? Let me give you an example. During Hurricane Maria, I got a call from the American Red Cross National Headquarters. Do you have connectivity to Puerto Rico? And I said, yes, we do. I was driving down I-55 in Western Illinois. All I had in the car was basically a mobile HF rig and an antenna, no computer. I took the message over the phone, formatted it as a radiogram, ICS 213, and I transmitted it on the 20-meter CW watch frequency, and it was acknowledged, and I used CW. Was it maybe the best mode to do it? No, but it's the mode that I had available, and there was no target address for the agency in Puerto Rico. Okay, so the message worked fine. If you take a look at Hurricane Maria, I think Emma's here. He'll tell you that a lot of the welfare traffic transmitted out of Puerto Rico is by voice mode. Okay, HF single sideband. This, I don't get me wrong. I have a great RRI has a great relationship with the WinLink development team. They're great guys. They're very responsive to all the tools and products that we've developed. The I Am Safe program, they're a critical part of the RRI, I Am Safe program, where we're all for WinLink, but there's 700,000 licensed radio amateurs in the United States. How many of them are WinLink equipped? You need to have a diversity of modes and methods available, because you never know what you're going to need to press into service. You never know how you're going to originate the message. And this is sort of that same fixation with WinLink that you get with the imaging. I agree 100% with what you said about imaging, and there's all kinds of misconceptions about the ICS 213, the process. I'm not going to dig into it because we'll spend the night here, talking about these things. But I agree 100%, and I've always preached that radio amateurs need to be forthright. They need to sit down with a served agency, be it their local emergency management or relief agencies, and they need to say, here's what we bring to the table. We have this decentralization, we have this dispersal, we have this survivability, we have these capabilities, but it comes at a price. And the price is that we're not a replacement for the internet or Starlink or the public switch telephone network or cellular networks, and there's limitations to what we can send and receive. But we can offer you a degree of survivability. You have to be honest and forthright in your offer to don't oversell, your capabilities. For that matter, if I've got one, we talk about this in the emergency planning class, if I have 100 radio operators registered with my MCOM group, whatever flavor it is, and a real major disaster happens, an earthquake or, a hurricane, well, I can guarantee you, and statistics prove this, studies actually prove this in the emergency management world, you're going to lose about 30% of your members right off the bat as either disaster victims or their priority will be other family members who are disaster victims. And then you're going to lose probably another, roughly speaking, 30% or so to people that have critical occupations. They work for public utilities. They have infrastructure jobs. They work in the medical professions. They do things that are they're volunteer firefighters as well, right? Things of this nature. So you may think that you have 100 guys, but in reality you end up with 30 or 40, and then you can't work them 24/7. So now at any one time, maybe you have 20 guys that you can put in the field, to staff these critical functions. And then in the amateur community with the aging, well, look at us all on here. Let's be honest with you. I'm looking right now, and so far I know Emma was visible here a bit ago. He might be younger than me, but everybody I can see at the moment has gray hair. So, you begin to run into the physical limitations of age, within the amateur community. There's a lot of factors that are outside the scope of our discussion today, in the limited time that we have available. But it's really important to understand that, there are pros and cons to every mode of communication. You say it's great, I can send an email directly with WinLink. That's true, you can. That is, of course, assuming that the person at the other end reads that email, right? If I have a radio operator embedded at a message center, say at the EOC or a public safety answering point, and that person's not at his desk, then he has that human ability to dynamically deal with that problem, maybe take that message to the message router who can take it to a public safety answering point, transfer that message to, say, a public safety talk group to get it to him in the field. So you begin to look at the complexities of the disaster telecommunications environment, and you may think, from your perspective as the originator of that message, is great, it's digital, and I type it in, I put his email in there, but there's this whole dynamic occurring out in the field. I can tell you from having worked on the professional side, you run into emergency managers and public safety officials who perhaps should be in the EOC and should be within access to that message routing process, who nonetheless grab a handheld radio, their prep or whatever you call it in the modern day and age, and they get in their vehicle and they go out to wherever the disaster site is, and of course it's probably hundreds of square miles, and they think that they're going to manage the disaster operation from the hood of a patrol car or fire truck somewhere. And this is really common, where emergency management is a sub-function of law enforcement or fire service, where they're used to tactilely handling things on scene. So this is the trap radio amateurs fall into. They make these very simplistic assumptions about how things operate. Okay, they see things from, as we all tend to do, and this is very human. We all see things from our perspective. But unless you've actually worked in disaster operations and you've worked on maybe the professional side, you don't always think about the complexities of how things operate. You don't understand, for example, how easy it is to miss an email in time of emergency when you're being pulled in every direction. Whereas if I walk up to you with a message and I hand it to you, I'm more likely to notice it, or I have a methodology to reach out to you locally and say, hey, do you receive that message? Do you have a reply? Let's manage this message center process. And I wrote an article some years back in the Q&I newsletter about how to set up a message center. There's a whole methodology you can dig into about how message centers operate and how you keep files of messages. You brought up the signature aspect. The signature is important in terms of validating authority. It's an accounting, principle, more than an operational principle, and that should be kept on file. You don't need an original signature at the point of delivery. You need the original signature at the point of origination on the ICS 213 form. And when you run a message center, there is supposed to be a file for those things. People often ask why the radiogram form has a message serial number. You don't need a message serial number. Well, you're damn right you do, because you have to have a file of all messages sent. And that means the message as originated with all who I transmitted it to, at what time, on what net, stapled or filed with that original message, with that original signature. That's how you originate a message in a message center, right? Or an EOC, or at a command post. So yes, you bring up all very valid points. I would challenge one other thing, Tom, and that is there's a tendency in hams to be agency-centric. Okay. And again, I think Emma's here. Emma, if you want to speak up, feel free. But, a lot of that welfare traffic originated out of Puerto Rico, or somebody like Emma setting up a radio and taking it upon himself to do it because there wasn't a functional emergency management process, right? Emma, do you want to comment on your experience? Are you still here?
So it's not my personal experience, but I think we had the people that really participated during the Hurricane Maria. I wasn't active at that time, but yeah, it was basically a single sideband radio, a microphone, an antenna, and that's it. That's the way the guys pass thousands of messages from and to the island. I can testify for that.
Right. Yeah, and so this brings me to my point that it's easy to, let's be honest, most hams really on their experiences in disasters are relatively small emergencies. A tornado, things like that. Most hams have never experienced what Puerto Rico experienced during Hurricane Maria. Probably few hams have experienced some of the problems that arose in with the flooding in Western Tennessee and North Carolina, right? And so it's important to keep things in perspective. And furthermore, I think it's also very important for us not to be so agency-centric. There's this tendency to always assume that we're going to be working on behalf of some magical government agency, be it emergency management or FEMA or fire service. And you may just find out that you're just working for your community. You're setting up a message center somewhere and accepting radio messages from all comers, welfare messages, maybe the local Red Cross guy walks up to you and says, hey man, we need cots, we need this, we need that. Can you find a way to get a message to national headquarters? This stuff is very dynamic and a real disaster. So understand those things and don't try and put MCOM into neat little boxes. So that's kind of my response, Tom. So I hope that's helpful. And we have any other questions, comments?
Well, if I may, I just wanted to say that there isn't any one way to get stuff through. Perhaps WinLink was a bad example. I just chose it out of the air. I have been one of the guys sitting in a chair up to my ankles in mud who got a guy in Chicago to take on 100, a book of 100 safe and well messages after Hurricane Camille tried to wipe Gulfport and Keesler Air Force Base
Yeah.
and the whole area off the map. Did a pretty good job of it, by the way. And I appealed for somebody willing to tackle a book of welfare messages. And I says, well, how many can you handle? And this guy in Chicago says, I'll take them all. And it's 6 o'clock in the morning. And God, you have to understand, my CW was terrible. Okay. I wasn't a trained CW op. And he stayed with me until the wee hours of the morning, until the last of those 100 were gone. Okay. And after the emergency, the Air Force sent out mail, certified mail, to check on what got through and what didn't. They had a 95% success rate on one ham out of Chicago who stayed with the job until all the messages he could possibly deliver were delivered. I've been at a couple of floods. All disasters are local, and a snowstorm where the thing that worked had nothing to do with the radio. We were carrying an RL 159 telephone reel with 4-wire comm wire over the snow drifts and tacking it up to the remaining phone poles, and kept going. And when we had the fire stations linked back to the alarm headquarters, there were only 4 of them. It's a small town. Everybody was happy. Nobody said, well, why didn't you do it by radio? They could talk to their fire stations.
That's right.
A tinker's damn how we did it. So
right. Yeah. You carrier pigeon or
I'm pleading for
field phones. Yeah.
Don't get narrow-minded about how it has to go. Don't tell me it always has to do this or always has to do that. And I agree with you completely about agency-centric. The agencies want them. Several agencies we run into just won't talk to us unless we can promise them that we'll have no two-hatters and they'll all report to agency this. And we can guarantee them this many operators. I said, well, thanks. Have a nice day. I can't do that for you, and goodbye. They don't like it, but that's reality. But the agencies push for agency-centric operators. They really push hard.
Well, yes, it's the, again, we'll digress into, the philosophy of how government operates. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole other than to say government becomes organic. It tends to lose perspective in that, ultimately it's a servant of the people. And sometimes I think it begins to see itself, as master of the people. And this is, again, decidedly human nature. But we do run into that kind of thing. And we've seen that trickle down. And when I was a section emergency coordinator at an EC many years ago, we ran into where hams got drawn into these control challenges between different agencies. And, it's you may as well take some Pyrotel and some blasting caps and just blow the whole thing up, because it usually, it's like a good team of sappers. It'll pretty much destroy any bridge that was built, over the years in its place. So yeah, your point's well taken, Tom. I appreciate it, absolutely. Do we have anybody else that has something they want to add? Or
let me jump in here real quick. Barry, what do you got in text?
I think Steve's question was already answered by James about who are the emerging MCOM customers that they have, and does RRI have a mission statement? I believe you said they do, and served agencies, and you're working on that. Like that was the only thing. And there are stats on WinLink. There are 7,350 active WinLink users and 113,664 WinLink messages sent in 2025 in March. So that's everything from the chat.
Yeah, okay, that's great. That 7,350 is important, right? So how many Aries volunteers are there in the United States? The reality is, Okay, admittedly, there's what, 700,000 licensed radio amateurs, but let's be honest, a lot of those are preppers and, people like they never really get on the air or do anything, that's direct, community service. But let's say there's, 100,000 active radio amateurs in the United States. That's a very small percentage that are WinLink equipped. So, the idea that, we're going to do everything on WinLink, or for that matter, DTN, right? RI has the DTN program you can access with the Vera and do all this, is also not realistic. So you need to have all these different tools available. And quite frankly, the common denominator modes retain value. That ability to set up that HF, single sideband radio under a tree, toss a wire up over a couple of branches, and establish communications with the net. So our improvise, adapt, overcome.
And as far as the hair goes, we're all gray, and if we keep Finn up much longer, he's going to be turning gray. Steve's been here from Norway, and it's 2 or 3 in the morning there, and he's up watching us. So thank you, Finn, for being here.
Yeah, that's early morning hours over there. Yeah, appreciate you being here.
Only because his wife has been tucked away in a vacation home. He gets away with it.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, other comments, questions, anything else before we close for the night, or?
That's what we're looking for. Any questions? Hands up, anything in chat.
Everything's good in chat.
Okay. All right. With that in mind, I'm going to pull the plug for another successful Zoom meeting. Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Lots of information there. One last chance. Any questions? Anybody have anything?
Yeah, just one quick question here. This is Jim, N2JLF. I got on just slightly late, but I heard everything. How do you become a certified radio operator? You go to your website and you have like a form or something that to fill out and take the courses?
Yep, I'll show you here real quick. So just go to radiorelay.org, go here to publications. And
right, I saw it. Oh, publications. All right.
And here's the CRO requirements and the CRO application.
Okay, but where's the actual courses? Are they within that website?
Yeah, right. There's some here on the website. You can find them if you search Radio Relay International on YouTube. You can find some of the recorded versions. And then, of course, we have a training cycle. So we periodically run the live training classes. Usually in maybe 2 cycles per year. So we'll probably lay off a little bit for the summer months and then pick them back up in the fall.
Okay, maybe I'll join then and join the live ones. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome.
That was good timing because I was almost ready to pull the plug. Anybody else? Joe, Barry, what do you got there?
Tom just made a comment about getting an honest answer to how many area operators are in the United States, and just made a comment that Josh at ARRL probably give an estimate. Because I'm guessing maybe 5,000 nationwide. That's not a lot of, and that's not a lot of people.
Well, I got myself, let me address that really briefly, because I know everybody wants to call it a night, but I got myself in a little political hot water years ago. I lived in Michigan, and I at the time, and I was heavily involved in ARES, RACES, etc., Section Emergency Coordinator. I wrote an article about the fact that I'm not sure I have the numbers exactly correct, but I went ahead and figured out that there were about 21,000, I think, radio amateurs in Michigan. And I believe at the time we had about 2,100, maybe, yeah, I think that's right. I think we had about 2,100 registered ARES members. This is quite a number of years ago, 1980s. But if you actually poll the emergency coordinators about how many of those are actually active versus, that is, they attend an occasional meeting or check into the occasional net, it drops to about 10% of that value. So out of 21,000 hams, you had about 210, maybe, about 250 really active Aries members. So what you end up with is, 1/10 of 1% of the amateur population. And a lot of people didn't like me addressing that issue, but the reality is, if you look nationwide at the amateur radio service, yeah, there's 700,000 licenses out there, but most of the people that are getting ham licenses are preppers, and they see ham radio as a free infrastructure that they can use in time of emergency, but not necessarily a tool for organizing the community to help your neighbors in time of disaster. And I know that sounds like a harsh assessment, but they don't join the local radio club to help pay for the repeater they want to use. They don't join the repeater association. They don't really pay the dues, but they want to have access to the infrastructure. And you see that now with also some of the CERT groups and stuff. They all go get ham licenses, and the repeaters are there, and well, that's great. You can use this infrastructure, but they don't necessarily want to join the local radio club to pay for the repeater or the infrastructure, that goes along with it. So I have a kind of a jaundiced eye about some of this kind of stuff. However, we don't speak to it. We don't have a narrative. I don't want to pick on the league because the league does a lot of good things, but the QST, the outreach, we do a very poor job of member recruitment, radio amateur recruitment, retention, developing new hams, particularly in the younger demographics. There's a whole long discussion we could have about all of that, but I would guess that the number of Aries members throughout the United States, I'd be surprised if it's 1% of the overall population of licensees, to be honest with you. That's not a criticism of the league, by the way. That's the league. The league doesn't have control over individual human choices.
I think that's a very honest assessment that you said there.
I got a comment about exactly what he said. I want to validate exactly what you said. 2 years ago, I rebuilt the Northeast New Jersey Aries from the ground up. I had 200 members on a list that was given to me. I now got 55 that I've weeded out and trained personally, but I can only guarantee you 15 will show up if something happens. And that's sad. So yeah, you just can't rely on one group. The more training and the more diverse you are, the better off you are.
Yeah. Here. Yeah.
Yep, I think we all agree with that. We experience that in almost every state and a lot of countries. We talk about Puerto Rico and places like that. Okay, well, let's pull the plug here. This has been a very interesting one. It sounds like, James, we set the ground for maybe another presentation.
Yeah, we can talk about that after I have some things completed to tell you all about.
All right, that sounds great. Sounds great. Look forward to it. Okay.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you, Barry. 73s, everybody, and I'll see you next week.